I started crying when I saw that my only barn had been demolished. Big bulldozers were everywhere. In a single moment, my whole world was destroyed. With shaking hands, I immediately called my son, who is the county judge. "Dad? What's wrong?" Michael's concerned voice came through the phone. They demolished everything," I sobbed, barely able to speak. "The HOA, they came while I was at the doctor's and tore down Grandpa's barn. Everything's gone, son." I fell to my knees as I looked at all the broken wood and metal pieces. My family's barn that stood for 70 years was now just a pile of rubble. This barn meant everything to me. My grandfather built it himself, I learned to farm here, and I raised my children here. Now it was all gone. I picked up a piece of our broken farm sign with my shaking hands. "Stay right there, Dad. Don't talk to anyone." "I'm coming right now," Michael said, his voice shifting from son to judge in an instant. Before I could respond, a shadow fell across me. I looked up to see Karen Devereaux, the Sunshine Estates HOA president, standing over me in her pristine white pantsuit, not a hair out of place. 3 men in matching HOA polo shirts stood behind her, arms crossed. "Mr. Wilson, this was a necessary action. Your structure violated multiple sections of the HOA covenant," she announced, tapping her manicured nail against her clipboard. "We sent you 15 notices over the past 3 months." I struggled to my feet, my old farmer's bones protesting. "This barn stood here for 70 years. Long before your fancy neighborhood even existed." Karen smiled thinly. "When the surrounding properties were developed in 2019, your land was legally incorporated into Sunshine Estates. Section 7.3 clearly states that no outbuildings may exceed aesthetic standards set by the board. This," she gestured dismissively at the rubble, "was an eyesore decreasing property values." My vision blurred with tears. This small farm was all I had left after Mary passed away last year. At 68, with medical bills piling up and my arthritis worsening, I depended on the income from storing equipment for neighboring farmers in that barn. Now I had nothing. "I never agreed to join your HOA, I said, my voice breaking. "We have your signature right here," Karen responded smugly, flipping through papers on her clipboard. Dated September 15, 2019. I shook my head in confusion. September 2019 was when I had been hospitalized for my heart attack. I couldn't have signed anything. Something wasn't right. "You'll be receiving a bill for the demolition costs," Karen continued. "Approximately $8,500. We expect payment within 30 days. The world spun around me. $8,000? I barely had $500 in my checking account. What was I going to do? A sleek black SUV pulled up, and my son Michael stepped out, still wearing his judge's suit from court. His face darkened as he surveyed the destruction, then hardened further when he spotted Karen and her entourage. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his authoritative courtroom voice echoing across what used to be my barn. Karen's smile faltered slightly. "HOA business. Who might you be?" "Judge Michael Wilson, County Superior Court," my son replied coldly. "And this is my father's property." For the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker across Karen's face. "Judge Wilson." I wasn't aware of the connection. "Clearly," Michael said, putting his arm around my shoulders. "Dad, are you okay?" I could only shake my head, tears still streaming down my weathered cheeks. "This demolition was fully authorized," Karen interjected, regaining her composure. "We have all the necessary documentation." Michael extended his hand. "I'd like to see that documentation. Now." Karen hesitated before handing over her clipboard. Michael scanned through the papers, his jaw tightening with each page. "This signature," he said finally, pointing to a line on the last page. "This isn't my father's signature. I should know. I've witnessed his signature on legal documents for 20 years. Karen's confident demeanor faltered. "He agreed to the HOA covenant when my father was hospitalized in September 2019, Michael interrupted. "Physically incapable of signing anything. So I'm very interested to know how his signature appears on a document dated during that time." The 3 men behind Karen exchanged uneasy glances. One of them took a step back. "There must be some confusion," Karen stammered. "The developer assured us all properties were properly incorporated." "I'm sure the forensic document examiners will clear everything up," Michael said calmly. "Along with the investigation into fraudulent representation, illegal demolition, destruction of private property, elder abuse, and whatever else the district attorney decides to add." Karen's face drained of color. "Now let's not be hasty. Perhaps we can come to some arrangement." The time for arrangements was before you illegally demolished a historic structure on my father's property, Michael replied. He turned to me. Dad, do you have any photos of the barn from before? I nodded. Albums full. Mary kept records of everything. And the property survey from when we added the new roof in 2015, it shows the original property lines before any of this development. Michael smiled grimly. Perfect. He turned back to Karen. You can expect to hear from the sheriff's department this afternoon. I suggest you all retain legal counsel. As Karen and her team hurriedly retreated to their vehicles, I felt a mix of grief and vindication. My barn was still gone, decades of memories demolished in a single morning. But for the first time since seeing the destruction, I felt a flicker of hope. Michael put his arm around my shoulders. Dad, we're going to fix this. I promise. Looking at the rubble of my family's legacy, I wasn't sure if anything could ever truly be fixed. But as Michael made some calls already shifting into action, I knew one thing for certain. The HOA had made a terrible mistake when they decided to target a poor farmer without checking who his son was first. The next morning, yellow crime scene tapes surrounded the demolished barn area. 2 sheriff's deputies were taking photographs while a woman in a suit carefully collected samples of debris. Michael stood nearby, deep in conversation with a tall man who kept nodding and writing in a small notebook. I sat on the porch of my farmhouse, clutching a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. I hadn't slept at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the barn collapsing, heard the phantom sounds of bulldozers and breaking wood. Mr. Wilson? A gentle voice interrupted my thoughts. A young woman with kind eyes approached, carrying a leather portfolio. I'm Amanda Chin from the district attorney's office. Judge Wilson asked me to take your statement. As I recounted everything, from the first HOA letter I'd received a year ago to the demolition, Amanda documented it all, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I mentioned my hospitalization during the alleged signing date, she made special note. We've already subpoenaed the hospital records to confirm, she assured me. And we'll need any documentation you have about the barn, property surveys, tax records, photographs. Michael joined us, introducing the tall man as Detective Rivera from the County Sheriff's Department. We're treating this as a serious case of property destruction and potential fraud, Detective Rivera explained. The forensic team is already examining the signature on those HOA documents. What about my barn? I asked, my voice small. Can anything be done? Michael and the detective exchanged looks. Dad, I've already spoken to a construction attorney, Michael said carefully. We're pursuing damages that would cover full restoration costs. But it won't be the same barn, I finished for him. The realization felt like a physical pain in my chest. Even if we rebuilt it, brick by brick, board by board, it wouldn't be the structure my grandfather raised, with the beam where we marked each grandchild's height, or the stall where Mary's favorite horse had lived. We also need to discuss something else, Michael continued, his expression grave. The HOA is claiming they have proper incorporation documents for your land into their development. I've requested all records from the county assessor, but I need to ask, did you ever sign anything when the Sunshine Estates development began construction? I shook my head firmly. Nothing. When they started building, a man came by, said he was from the development company. Offered to buy my land for half what it's worth. I refused. That was the end of it, I thought. Detective Rivera made a note. We'll need to investigate how your property was supposedly incorporated without consent. This may go beyond the HOA to the development company itself. Westland Development Group, Michael supplied. I've already started looking into their other projects. This might not be an isolated incident. For the first time since the demolition, I felt something beyond grief, anger, sharp and clarifying. They thought they could push around an old farmer. Figured I wouldn't have the means to fight back. Amanda nodded sympathetically. Unfortunately, we see this kind of predatory behavior toward elderly homeowners more often than you'd think. But most don't have a son who's a county judge. This isn't just about me, I said suddenly. The Johnsons down the road, they lost part of their orchard last year to some zoning change. And the Martinezes had to sell after those new water restrictions. How many others have they forced out? Michael's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. That's a very good question, Dad. And one we're going to investigate thoroughly. As they continued discussing legal strategies, I gazed out at the ruins of my barn. The pain was still raw, but alongside it grew a steely determination. This wasn't just about rebuilding a barn anymore. This was about justice, not just for me but for everyone who'd been bullied by people who thought they could get away with it. 3 days later, my kitchen table had disappeared under stacks of documents. Michael had taken emergency leave from the courthouse to focus on our case, which was expanding by the hour. Amanda from the DA's office had brought over boxes of records from previous Westland development projects, while Detective Rivera supplied documents from the county assessor's office. "This is worse than we thought," Michael said, circling something on a property map. "Based on these boundary surveys, at least 17 homeowners in the county may have had portions of their land improperly incorporated into Westland developments over the past 5 years. Amanda nodded grimly. "And look at these signatures." She laid out several documents side by side. "They're subtly different, but our forensic examiner believes at least 11 of these were forged by the same person." The doorbell rang and Detective Rivera entered with another man in a suit. "Dad, this is Edwin Park, the prosecutor who'll be handling our case," Michael introduced us. Edwin shook my hand firmly. "Judge Wilson has recused himself from any legal proceedings, of course, but has been instrumental in bringing this matter to our attention. We're taking this very seriously, Mr. Wilson. Have you found anything about the HOA's involvement?" I asked. "That's actually why I'm here," Rivera said, pulling out a tablet. "We executed a search warrant on the Sunshine Estates HOA office yesterday. Recovered some very interesting emails between Karen Devereaux and the CEO of Westland Development." He pulled up the emails and Michael read aloud, "Phase 3 expansion requires the Wilson property. Handle the old man and the usual compensation applies." Dated just 2 weeks ago. "The usual compensation?" I questioned. "We found evidence that Karen received a kickback for every property successfully incorporated into the HOA, Rivera explained. Specifically properties that were targeted for their development potential." "So this wasn't just about my eyesore barn?" I said bitterly. "Not at all," Edwin confirmed. "Based on these development plans we seized, Westland intended to build 6 luxury homes on your property. The barn was simply the first obstacle they needed removed. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They were going to take my entire farm. The house too." Michael nodded grimly. "They'd already drafted the violation notices for the house. Apparently your paint color and roof shingles don't meet their aesthetic standards either." I had to sit down, my legs suddenly weak. The thought of losing not just the barn but my entire home, the house where Mary and I had raised our children, where we'd spent our entire married life, was overwhelming. "What happens now?" I finally managed to ask. Edwin leaned forward. "We're preparing charges against both Karen Devereaux and 3 executives at Westland Development. Fraud, forgery, destruction of property, conspiracy, and potentially elder abuse given the targeting of older homeowners. And your case is just the beginning," Amanda added. "We've started contacting other affected homeowners. Several have already come forward with similar stories: mysterious HOA incorporation, excessive fines, pressure to sell." Michael put his hand on my shoulder. "This is becoming one of the biggest property fraud cases in county history, Dad." I should have felt vindicated, but all I could think about was my destroyed barn. "Will any of this bring back what I lost?" The room fell silent for a moment. "No," Michael admitted quietly. "But we're going to make sure they pay to rebuild it. And more importantly, we're going to make sure they can't do this to anyone else." As I looked around at the team assembled in my kitchen, my son the judge, the detective, the prosecutor, and the DA's investigator, I realized something important. These people who thought I was just a helpless old farmer had inadvertently sparked what might become the biggest legal case our county had seen in decades. Maybe I couldn't get back the exact barn my grandfather built, but I could make sure its destruction meant something. Word spreads quickly in small communities. By the end of the week, my driveway was filled with trucks and cars as neighbors I'd known for decades, and some I'd never met, came to offer support. Jim Hansen, whose family had farmed adjacent land for generations, organized a group of local builders to salvage what they could from the demolition site and clear away debris. "We can't bring back the original Earl, but we can sure as hell build you a new one," he told me, clapping my shoulder. Martha from the Historical Society arrived with a team of students, carefully photographing and documenting everything. "This barn was part of our county's agricultural heritage," she explained. "We're adding it to our records and will help ensure any reconstruction maintains historical accuracy." Even more surprising were the residents from Sunshine Estates itself, not the board members but regular homeowners horrified by what had been done in their name. "We had no idea," Sarah Jenkins told me as her husband helped sort through recovered barn wood. "They told us it was an empty, collapsing structure that posed a safety risk. The HOA never even brought it to a community vote." By afternoon, the story had reached local media. A news van parked at the edge of my property, and a reporter interviewed Michael about the growing investigation. "This is not just about one barn or one farmer," my son explained to the cameras. "This appears to be a systematic effort to force rural and elderly homeowners out of valuable properties through fraudulent means. The district attorney's office is investigating potential criminal charges, and I've already been contacted by multiple law firms interested in pursuing a class action lawsuit on behalf of affected homeowners." That evening, as everyone finally departed, I sat on my porch swing watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple above the empty space where my barn had stood. The wound was still raw, but somehow the day's events had begun a kind of healing. Michael brought out 2 glasses of lemonade, sitting beside me in comfortable silence for a while. "Mary would be proud of you," I finally said. "Standing up for what's right." He smiled sadly. "I learned that from both of you. Mom always said it wasn't enough to know what's right, you have to do something about it. I just wanted to live out my days in peace here," I sighed. "Never thought I'd be at the center of some big legal battle." "Sometimes we don't choose our battles, Dad. Sometimes they choose us." Michael took a sip of his lemonade. "But I promise you this, we're going to win." I gazed at the empty space where my barn had stood, feeling a strange mixture of loss and purpose. "Yes," I said quietly. "I believe we will." The county courthouse was packed the morning of the preliminary hearing. I sat in the front row, uncomfortable in my one good suit, as Michael sat on the other side of the courtroom. Though he'd recused himself from presiding over any cases related to mine, his presence as both my son and a respected judge seemed to cast a long shadow over the proceedings. Karen Devereaux and 3 executives from Westland Development sat at the defense table, their team of lawyers whispering urgently among themselves. Karen refused to meet my eyes, staring straight ahead with rigid posture. Judge Harriet Langford, a no-nonsense woman with 3 decades on the bench, entered and called the court to order. "Your Honor, we request all charges be dismissed," the lead defense attorney began immediately. "This is clearly a case of undue influence by Judge Wilson. My son has recused himself completely from these proceedings," I blurted out, unable to contain myself. Judge Langford fixed me with a stern look. "Mr. Wilson, outbursts will not be tolerated in my courtroom. Another one and you'll be removed." Then she turned to the defense attorney. "As for your motion to dismiss, denied. The evidence presented by the prosecution is substantial enough to warrant these proceedings regardless of any family connections." For the next 3 hours, Edwin Park methodically laid out the case. The forged documents, the fraudulent incorporation of properties, the email evidence showing conspiracy, and finally the illegal demolition of my barn. "Perhaps most disturbing, Your Honor," Edwin concluded, "is that this was not an isolated incident. Our investigation has uncovered a pattern of similar actions against at least 16 other property owners. Many of them elderly, all of them vulnerable in some way. This represents a systematic effort to defraud legitimate property owners for corporate profit." When the defense's turn came, they attempted to shift blame, claiming Karen had acted without company authorization, that documents might have been mishandled, but not deliberately forged, that the barn demolition was an unfortunate misunderstanding. Judge Langford seemed unmoved by their arguments. After both sides had presented their cases, she adjusted her glasses and addressed the court. "Based on the evidence presented, I find sufficient cause to move forward with all charges against all defendants. This court takes allegations of property fraud, document forgery, and elder targeting extremely seriously." She set a trial date for 3 months later, then denied the defense's request for modified bail conditions. As we left the courthouse, reporters swarmed around us. Edwin fielded most questions, but eventually someone thrust a microphone toward me. "Mr. Wilson, how do you feel about today's ruling?" I paused, searching for the right words. "This isn't just about my barn anymore. It's about making sure powerful people can't push around folks they think won't or can't fight back. I'm just a farmer who wanted to be left in peace, but now I'm fighting for everyone who's been wronged by these people." That soundbite made the evening news across 3 counties. As the legal proceedings continued over the following weeks, something remarkable happened at my farm. What began as a few neighbors offering help evolved into a community-wide restoration project. Local contractors donated materials. The high school woodshop class volunteered to recreate the hand-carved signs and decorative elements. Farmers from across the county arrived with equipment and supplies. Even some Sunshine Estates residents joined in, those who had been horrified to learn what their HOA had done in their name. "We're not just rebuilding a barn," Jim Hansen announced one Saturday morning to the assembled volunteers. We're making a statement. Nobody pushes around one of our own. The rebuilding wasn't exact. Nothing could truly replace the original, but they incorporated salvaged wood from the old structure wherever possible. The team even managed to restore the beam where generations of Wilson Heights had been marked, carefully fitting it into the new frame. Michael found the original blueprints in county archives, allowing the builders to follow my grandfather's design. I spent hours sitting in a lawn chair, supervising and sharing stories about the original construction with anyone who would listen. My grandfather refused to use a single nail in the main supports, I explained to a group of young volunteers. Said proper joinery was the mark of a craftsman. Those joints held for 70 years until those bulldozers came. The new barn rose steadily over 6 weekends of community labor. Not identical to the original, but somehow carrying its spirit. Each beam, each board, each shingle represented a small act of defiance against those who thought they could erase my history. One evening, as the sunset painted the half-finished structure in golden light, Amanda from the DA's office came to deliver news. Westland Development has approached us about a plea deal, she said, sitting with Michael and me on the porch. They're offering full restitution to all affected homeowners, plus punitive damages. They'll also formally relinquish any claims to improperly incorporated properties. And Karen? I asked. No deal for her. The evidence of her involvement is too substantial, and she's refused to cooperate against her co-conspirators. Michael frowned. What about criminal charges? The executives are offering to plead guilty to reduced charges, still felonies, but with the possibility of suspended sentences in exchange for their testimony and cooperation. I considered this news, watching volunteers packing up tools as dusk settled over my land. And I suppose that's considered justice. Amanda sighed. It's not perfect, Mr. Wilson, but the settlement would be substantial, enough to fully compensate everyone affected and still send a strong message to other developers. And the criminal record would effectively end their careers in this industry. What do you think, Dad? Michael asked quietly. I thought about Mary, about what she would say. She'd always been the practical one. The money doesn't matter much to me, I said finally. But if it helps the others who were hurt by these people, and if it means they can't do this again. I nodded slowly. I can live with that. The courtroom was even more crowded for the settlement and sentencing hearing 3 months later. Property owners affected by Westland's schemes filled the gallery, many nodding to me as I entered. I'd gotten to know many of them during our shared ordeal. Judge Langford reviewed the terms of the agreement, occasionally looking over her glasses at the defendants. The court accepts the plea arrangement as outlined, she declared finally. Westland Development will pay $4.7 million in restitution and damages to be divided among the affected property owners as detailed in Appendix A. All falsely incorporated properties will be legally returned to their rightful owners with proper documentation filed within 30 days. She turned her attention to the 3 Westland executives. As for your suspended sentences, understand that this court will be watching you closely. Any violation of your probation terms will result in immediate imprisonment. Finally, she addressed Karen, who stood alone with her attorney. Ms. Devereaux, as you have refused the prosecution's offers and maintained your plea of not guilty despite overwhelming evidence, this court sentences you to 4 years in state prison for your role in this conspiracy, with an additional requirement to perform 500 hours of community service upon release. Karen's face remained impassive, but I saw her shoulders slump slightly. After the proceedings, many of the other homeowners gathered around me in the courthouse hallway, shaking my hand and offering thanks. We would never have fought back without you, Mrs. Martinez told me, her eyes tearful. They would have taken all our lands piece by piece. I didn't do much, I protested. Just called my son when they knocked down my barn. Sometimes that's all it takes, Jim Hansen remarked. One person who refuses to be bullied, who makes the call that changes everything. 6 months after the demolition, we held a barn-raising celebration. The new structure stood complete, similar to the original in design, but freshly built with a combination of salvaged materials and new lumber. A brass plaque beside the door commemorated the original 1953 construction by my grandfather, with a second line noting the 2025 community rebuilding. Hundreds of people attended the celebration, from farmers I'd known my whole life to newcomers from Sunshine Estates, which was now undergoing a massive overhaul of its HOA structure and bylaws. Tables of food stretched across the yard, and someone had organized a small band to play on a makeshift stage. Michael found me sitting quietly on a hay bale watching the festivities. You okay, Dad? he asked, handing me a glass of lemonade. Just thinking about your mother, I replied. She always did love a good party. He smiled, looking out at the gathering. She would have loved this. I nodded, feeling a bittersweet pang. I still miss the old barn. All those memories. I know. Michael put his hand on my shoulder. But look around. This new barn has already gathered new memories, of a community coming together, of justice being served. That's a pretty powerful legacy too. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across my land, I realized he was right. What had begun as a devastating loss had transformed into something unexpected. A rallying point, a cause, a new beginning. The HOA and developers had seen me as just a poor old farmer, an easy target. They never bothered to check who my son was. More importantly, they never understood what this community was capable of when one of its own was wronged. I stood up, straightening my back despite the arthritis. Well, I suppose I should go thank everyone properly. As I walked toward the crowd, people smiled and nodded in recognition. Not as a victim anymore, but as the farmer whose stand against injustice had united a community and changed things for the better. The barn behind me wasn't the same one my grandfather built. But in many ways, it represented something even more meaningful. Proof that sometimes when everything seems lost, justice can still prevail. And that was a legacy worth building on.